Have you ever played Battle for Neighborville and gotten frustrated by the gameplay? Perhaps you struggled to understand what was going on or why everything felt inconsistent. Well, those frustrations were common among many players, and it's all because of the upgrade system. Upgrades were introduced as a replacement for variants, but they are severely underbaked and poorly thought out. This change was made back in 2017 due to shifts in the live service industry, as EA wasn't confident that Garden Warfare's format would be sustainable. As a result, many controversial changes were implemented, such as the upgrade system, costumes, a battle pass, and an item shop. These out-of-touch choices gave the game a unique identity compared to its predecessors, but they also alienated many players and divided the fanbase. I'm not here to argue that the game is flawed simply because a core mechanic changed. Change is inevitable and can lead to innovation. However, as I mentioned earlier, this wasn't born from a creative director's vision. Instead, it was an attempt to streamline mechanics to match industry trends at the time, which resulted in corners being cut and a system that left much to be desired. And yes, I'm going to compare the variants from Garden Warfare 2 to the upgrades in Battle for Neighborville, because one accomplishes what I'm going to discuss correctly, while the other does not. I think it's fair to make this comparison, especially since Battle for Neighborville's tip screen explicitly states that you can combine upgrades to make your own variants. So with that aside, let's begin. In Garden Warfare 2, every variant had a unique appearance and a distinct primary weapon. When you saw a specific variant, you immediately knew what abilities and weapons it had, allowing you to strategize accordingly. In Battle for Neighborville, none of the upgrades have any visual representation. They function as a checklist of buffs to your character, making the game feel inconsistent and unpredictable. You essentially have to prepare for every possible scenario, because it's impossible to tell what upgrades someone is using. Some argue that once you become more familiar with the game, you'll recognize the most commonly used upgrades, but honestly, that argument doesn't hold up at all. For starters, relying on knowledge of the most common upgrades just to understand the game is absurd. It's far more complicated from the previous system. In Garden Warfare 2, if you see a fire pea shooter, you immediately know its attacks will set you on fire. The same applies to other variants like Ice Pea Shooter or Talk Chomper. But with Battle for Neighborville's upgrades, what do you have to work with? Nothing. When all characters look the same with no unique identifying details, you have no way to anticipate their abilities. This change alone makes the game significantly less accessible. You essentially have to be an expert to know what your enemy is doing. It doesn't help that the game doesn't provide any clarification for when you lose. When you get vanquished, the game shows an upgrade icon, but not the actual upgrades, many of which share the same icon anyway. So what good does this even serve? Despite being advertised as a variant creator, upgrades don't change gameplay enough to offer the same level of diversity as variants did.
Every variant in Garden Warfare 2 had unique stats that set them apart!
For example, Fire Pea Shooter had a different reload speed, ammo count, and damage compared to default Pea Shooter, along with the ability to ignite enemies. Now let's look at some of Battle for Neighborville's upgrades. Homing Pea. It provides slight homing at specific distances. Okay. What about Last Ditch? Oh, it just makes your final projectile deal 3 times more damage. Pro Spitter. It makes your chili bean bomb travel farther. I'm having such a fun time creating my own and unique original variants that definitely feel different from how I normally play the character. And a lot of ability upgrades aren't that creative either. Move faster when using Sunny Side Up. Gain ammo when using Warp. Faster ability refresh when dealing damage with Chuck Shot. None of this is particularly innovative. PopCap hyped up the system as a major feature, but in reality, it's just a list of minor stat boosts. I won't pretend that upgrades can't influence playstyle, because some do allow for special loadouts. However, that's rare. Most upgrades don't change enough, and there aren't enough of them in general. The only class that comes to mind with truly distinct playstyles is Chomper, since its upgrades focus on different mechanics rather than just minor stat boosts. There's a reason people don't use certain upgrades like Bean Party. It's just inferior to other options. Upgrades aren't creative enough to warrant widespread use. Many are too niche to build an entire playstyle around, and limited selection makes customization feel shallow. What's even worse if this concept was already present in Garden Warfare 2, just in a slightly less in-depth form. Upgrades function the same way in both games. You have a limited number to choose from, and make small gameplay adjustments, and you unlock more through leveling up. We essentially lost variants for a marginally expanded upgrade system, and that's why people were disappointed with Battle for Neighborville. What's frustrating is that the system, in my eyes, is entirely unfixable. If you want to solve the accessibility issue, how? Add cosmetics to each upgrade so you can tell what's being used? That would clash with the costume system already heavily pushed in the game. And if you create unique cosmetics for upgrades, you're basically just recreating variants under a different name. This really just proves that the upgrade system was a bad idea from the start. It's no surprise that people were disappointed when they were expecting Garden Warfare 3. Fans wanted a game like Garden Warfare 2 but with more classes and variants. Instead, we got 8 new classes which hardly make up for the 100 plus variants we lost. Maybe there's a way to fix this that I'm not seeing. If you have an idea, comment with your own take, because I can't find a way to salvage the system. Upgrades were one of PopCap's most heavily marketed features, but they ultimately contributed to the downfall of both the game and the studio. Battle for Neighborville's updates didn't last beyond a year, and the studio shut down after the Nintendo Switch port released. I think upgrades could have worked if they were more numerous and meaningfully changed characters. However, PopCap advertised them as a replacement for variants, and that's what ultimately ruined them. The system failed to deliver the diversity and identity that the variants provided, leaving fans with a bad taste in their mouths. And it didn't help that the game underdelivered in nearly every other aspect too, from updates to content. If they were hypothetically to make Garden Warfare 3, Battle for Neighborville's upgrade system should not return. It's a mess. You can try to refine it, but it will always be inferior to variants. Some people argue that Garden Warfare 3 should have variants alongside Battle for Neighborville's upgrades, sprinting, and other mechanics. But no. Just no. People justified the removal of variants by claiming that fewer characters would make the game easier to balance. But Battle for Neighborville's balance was already a disaster. Imagine trying to juggle balancing classes, their variants, and every possible upgrade combination. It would be a complete nightmare.